Hello. Welcome to the 22nd part of the Necromancer's evolutionary traits. A special thanks to my channel members for supporting me. And if you want to support, you can join my channel membership or Patreon for as low as $1. Thank you very much. Let's begin. At the beginning of this part, we see that Andreas and Vivienne are running. Andreas says, "Thank you for coming with me." She says, "Don't mind it. If anything, I'm glad I could help." Andreas thinks, "I brought her with me for now because I have no valid excuses to leave her behind. But is this going to be okay? At this rate, not only will I be unable to use my summon, but if I screw up, she might find out about my connection to Sharon. Has my judgment slipped after being up all night? Maybe I should make up an excuse and send her back now." They suddenly stopped. There are some people standing in front of them. Andreas says, "No way. Not the other students, too. The students are acting like zombies." She says, "Is this also Professor Karen's doing?" He says, "Yes, those were all students who took his class." She says, "Why would a professor do this?" He says, "Vivienne." She says, "Yes." Andreas says, "Can you subdue them without harming them? Time is running out. I have to go and stop the professor." Vivienne says, "Okay, I'll follow you soon." Andreas thinks, "Please don't. I'd be happier if you didn't." Andreas starts to run and says, "All right, I'll leave them to you." They attack Indira's. Vivienne blocks the attack. He thinks, "I managed to separate myself from her for now. But she isn't just going to kill everyone, is she? I guess I have to believe in her for now." After that, we see Sharon is standing in front of a really big monster. Sharon smiles and says, "Good. It's perfectly under control." Sharon feels something. He uses a bone wall to block an attack from behind, and he is holding a red crystal. Andreas gets there and says, "Now you've really done it." Sharon says, "Andreas? Why are you here?" Andreas thinks, "I thought I'd be quick enough. Seems I'm too late." The abnormally fast unsealing time and the strange magic that surrounded his body. A Peldarine crystal. Back in the game, Jester was the one who had it. So he's the one behind this. Sharon says, "How dare you attack me?" "Well, no matter. I was about to go to look for you." Android says, "I'm surprised. To be honest, I didn't expect someone like you to even get that dying. Not to mention, a small timer like you, Master." Sharon gives an evil laugh. He says, "That insolent way of talking. I knew I was right to take you in. Long ago, I secretly overheard a conversation between your father and Master Morn." After that, we see a flashback where his father says, "If we were to grow it, it would change the foundations of black magic or even the whole world." Morn says, "Indeed. What a fearsome thing." Sharon says, "The reason for your change of attitude must be that you have the thing they spoke of, or that you know how to use it." Andreas thinks, "To think Evina mob like him knew it." Sharon says, "Now, whether you can use it or not, show me the legacy left behind by Cromwell." Andreas says, "How dull. Here I was wondering what you were planning to say. Turns out you were just planning to rob a kid." Andreas summons Nickel and Timer and says, "All right, enough talking." Sharon is really surprised and thinks, "Is that Tiger Lord Timer he got from the congregation? He can control high-rank undead already? But as long as I have the Peldarine crystal with me." Sharon smiles and says, "Remember who you master is, Andreas." Andreas says, "I didn't learn anything from you. But as the saying goes, the student outshines the master." Sharon laughs and says, "You really are an insolent brat." Sharon summons an army of undead. Andreas sees all his summons and says, "Kushane is buffing all his summons." Andreas brings out his sword and says, "I have had enough of you. I'm cutting my ties with you here and now, Sharon Dyfrin." Sharon says, "See if you can. Because I'm going to kill you and take Kane's legacy. And then I'm going to reanimate your corpse to be my slave." Vivienne is still fighting the other students. She thinks, "I have to catch up with Andreas, but they keep backing up. There's going to be no end to this. Maybe I should just kill them all." She thinks of Andreas saying, "Vivienne, can you subdue them without harming them?" She thinks, "No, Mr. Fairy wouldn't want that." One of them attack her from behind. She blocks the attack. Another attacks her from the side. She suddenly remembers something. She thinks of Andreas saying the name of a big monster. She thinks he said some sort of spell. I remember it. She smiles and says, Kushian, and hits one of the students on the neck. She thinks it's wrong. What was it again? Kushuan. She keeps hitting them after saying random words. After a while she thinks, this is no good. If I keep this up, I'm really going to kill them all. Maybe. Kushain? All the students get scared to hear that. She thinks, it's working? In that case, all I have to do now is beat them up. After that we see some ghosts come out of the student's body. She runs toward them and thinks, I have to end this before they do anything weird. She punches a ghost. It surrounds her. Ghost says, what are you hiding, Vivienne? Either way, you'll be thrown out. No? After all, it's your fate to be thrown away again. Trying to cling on to life. How unsightly. You put your trust in a stranger when even your own mother threw you away? I was hoping for a son. I wish I had never given birth to you. She is really scar-end. Ghost says, your very existence is a misfortune, and everyone around you will die because of you. Why don't you just quietly die off alone? She says, if I disappear, will Mr. Fairy be safe? She puts a sword against her own neck. Ghost say for SY, I promise. She says, pro.
Mise.
She thinks of Andrea's saying, please, keep that promise. I'll always be looking out for you. After that we see, Andrea's, Nickel, and Timer are all destroying Karen's undead summons easily. Sharon smiles and uses the crystal. He says, let's see how far you can go with just the three of you. Kushain is ready to attack. It gathers energy in his mouth and calls Rudall. The giant hand punches the Kushain in the head. Kron is really surprised and sees the hand and thinks, what is that? Andreas gives order to Timer and says, I'll leave this big one to you. Andreas says, Nickel, clear out the mooks and get into hiding. I'm going to take him down now. Timer punches Kushain in the face. Andreas thinks, rather than spending my mana on inefficient Rudos, I'm going straight for Sharon and will steal his Peldarine crystal. I have to finish this fight before anyone notices. Kushain screams. Kron says, indeed. No way you could lose to such an attack. Andreas and Timer appear right behind Sharon. Andreas attacks him. Kushain blocks the attack with his hand. Sharon laughs and says, do you really think you're a match for an ancient magical beast? Andreas thinks, using the deadly sins here might make it easier, but greed has its backlash, and sloth is still in its cool-down period. Andreas says, seems you like antiques. If it's an ancient magical beast, I also have one. Remember that big arm from earlier? Sharon thinks, could it be that it was a giant? Where did he get something like that? Next time, I'll have to crush your head. Andreas thinks, I've got to taunt him as much as I can. Sharon says, try it. If you can, that is. A magic circle appears under Andreas's feet. A big explosion happens. Sharon is laughing. Andreas is floating in the air unharmed. Sharon is really surprised and says, how? Andreas thinks, this is vampire's blood magic? Could it be because of that time? He thinks of a vampire biting him in the earlier chapters. Andreas thinks, I see now. Sharon was probably studying Angela's blood. Sharon says, how did you survive that high-rank blood magic? Andreas says, how knows? Maybe thanks to Angela Lucifer's gift? Sharon gets really angry and says, don't tell me it was you who let that vampire escape? Andreas says, my bad. Maybe you should treat your pupil nicer. Sharon gets so much angrier that his head looks like it's about to explode. He starts to attack. Andreas easily dodges his attacks. Sharon says, how dare you? How dare you ruin my once-in-a-lifetime chance? Andreas is dodging all the attack of Kushain. He thinks, looks like Nickel managed to hide. Now, Andreas attacks Sharon again. Kushain blocked the attack. Sharon thinks, this brat. He's more skilled with a sword than I thought. Andreas appears behind him, and he is about to stab him, but Kushain blocks him in time. Andreas gets hit. He coughs out blood. Nickel appears there and cuts one of Kushain's leg. Sharon is really surprised. Andreas laughs. Nickel has cut one of Karen's arms. Andreas says, good job, Nickel. Sharon is screaming with pain. He thinks, the crystal. Kushain screams uncontrollably. Andreas thinks, crap. Kushain's control is. No, without the crystal. Sharon jumps toward the crystal, and Kushane is behind him. Kushane eats hail of Sharon. Andreas gives Nickel an order saying, "Nickel, please grab its attention. We've got to recover that crystal." Kushane breaks the crystal. Kushane is about to attack with an energy beam from its mouth. Andreas says, "Not good." Kushane's energy beam is ready. Andreas screams and says, "Everyone dodge." Kushane attacks, and a really big explosion happens. Kushane quickly grabs Andreas. Nickel and Timer are watching him with angry looks on their faces. Kushane easily throws Timer away. Vivienne gets there and cuts Kushane's hand. Andreas sees her and thinks, "Vivienne?" Andreas gets free of Kushane's grip. She says, "Andreas." She jumps toward Andreas to grab him. Kushane appears behind her. Andreas sees that and thinks, "No. Watch out." Kushane hits her with a really powerful punch. She goes bouncing really far. When dust clears, we see that Timer is holding Vivienne. She is unconscious. Andreas is relieved to see her safe. Andreas says, "There's no time to be worrying." Andreas brings out a sin of greed and thinks, "Wish I could do a bit more research before I use it." But System says, "The original sin has detected greed. Would you like to use greed?" He thinks, "It's better than ending up dead here. Use it." Vivienne opens her eyes. She is really surprised to see Andreas standing in front of Kushane alone, ready to fight. Andreas is giving an evil smile. Kushane attacks. Andreas easily dodges it and says, "Filthy ancient beast. I'll turn you into an undead and make you my slave." Andreas uses his sword to attack. Kushane easily blocks it with his arm. Andreas gets back. He says, "I see. An absolute defense that only reacts against perceived attacks. In other words, surprise attacks work." And Dyrus says, "Nickel plays the bait." Nyx attacks Kushane. Vivienne is watching them fight. She sees Nickel and thinks that's an undead. She sees toward Timer and says, "Mr. Cat?" Nickel is attacking Kushane. Andreas appears behind Kushane and thinks, "Good." He attacked him from behind. Kushane screams. Andreas says, "Now, I'll turn you into undead." System says, "The sealed sword Galaxer has detected an ancient magical beast's blood, absorbing the magical beast Kushana's blood." Andreas says, "What?" System says, "The greed's active duration is ending. Incoming backlash." Andreas throws up blood. Vivienne says, "Andreas." Andreas falls on the ground. Sword is absorbing Kushane's blood. She comes running toward him. Kushane's is screaming and is slowly crumbling. She is holding Andreas in her arms. System says, "The ancient magical beast's blood has released the Galaxer's first seal." Andreas thinks, "I never thought the blood of an ancient magical beast would be the key to unsealing Galaxer." Vivienne says, "Is it over?" Andreas coughs and says, "I'm sorry for putting you in danger, Vivienne." She says, "It's okay. As long as you're safe, Andreas." He says, "And sorry for hiding my real identity." She says, "I don't mind. No matter who you are. It doesn't change that you're my Mr. Fairy." Andreas thinks, "I wonder, was there even a time that someone put their complete trust in me like this?" After that, we see back at the Colosseum someone says, "With this, the 111th opening ceremony of the Rodlin Academy will now begin. To Mr. Luis Artman, the first in his class, please come to the podium." Andreas thinks, this is where the game really starts. Mr. Luis Artman demonstrated academic excellence and good conduct. So far, I somehow managed to survive despite my lack of information, although the number of people I have to protect has increased. At the same time, it also gives me strength. From here on, many big events will be coming, but sure, I'll face them all. This was for the Deadly Sins. Season 1 ends here. Subscribe for more parts.